Hey there everybody, it's Mark Curley. I'm back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about editors and what it is they ask you to change, or what I've found in my career are the things that I am most often asked to change in my stories. And let's not waste any time. I'll tell you quickly though that I'm working on a panel from a new graphic novel that I am creating. It's about a character who spends an adventurous day in Taiwan, and the entire story is going to be set in Taiwan, so that's why you see this illustration is going to have a little bit of that look to it. But let's go ahead and get on with the first thing. Your editor may ask you to change the title of the book. This has happened to me a lot, so much so that it doesn't even surprise me anymore. I suppose the first time it happened was with a book that was going to be called Billy Brainer. And they didn't like that name, Billy Brainer, and they had me change it. I changed it to Billy Bugby, and then they didn't like that name either, so I finally changed it to Billy Click, Creech Battler. But that's just the first of them. You know, The Drawing Lesson is a book that I wanted to be called The Mentor. And they didn't, we got halfway through the project, and they said, we don't like that title. Can you come up with something else? My Last Summer with Cass was going to be called Two Artists. And again, they wanted me to change that title, and as I said, by this time I was like, yeah, it's no big shock. I think the lesson is the publisher cares very deeply about the title, and I think maybe their research shows that it is the very first impression that people get of your book. It can be a sort of a deal breaker, I suppose, in the eyes of some prospective readers, so they feel you got to get it right. So anyway, just brace yourself for that. If you are, if you have the chance to get published and you're sort of wondering what aspects of the book are completely within my control, what aspects are within the publisher's control, I'd say the title is one of those things that you may have to be ready to bend on, be flexible about. Let's move on to number 2. Your editor may ask you to change the cover design. Now, this only applies to people who are both the writer and the illustrator, as I generally am for all of my books. But if you are not the illustrator, you may not even have a say in the design of the cover. So that's a whole nother situation there, apparently, if you are just the author and someone else is the illustrator. I've heard that sometimes they don't even ask for your opinion on the cover. They just take charge of that, and you end up with whatever cover you get. I'm not sure if that's true for all. Certainly for the most powerful authors, I'm sure they have a lot of say in their books. Let's move on, though, to number 3. Your editor may ask you to change the ending of the story. And now, again, that might be a bit of a shock to you, but I certainly found that was the case with My Last Summer with Cass, my very latest book. I had created not the finished version of the book, but an outline, a sort of detailed outline of the story. And they sort of made it clear to me that they thought the ending was not satisfying enough. So I had to sort of go back and completely reimagine the ending and greatly extend the length and the sort of complexity of the ending of the story, so as to keep them happy and, of course, to make it a better story, I think, in the end, is what is really going on there. We'll talk a little more about that, like why? Why are they asking you to make all these changes? Get ready for that. The ending, of course, is a crucial part of, readers being satisfied with the story that you're telling, and if you haven't quite got it right, the editor is going to come to you and say, let's rethink this. And I would say, in my case, I'm glad that I was asked to redo the ending. When I think back to the original ending that I had in mind for that story, it would not have been terribly satisfying. Let's move on to number 4, kind of related. You may be asked to write new scenes. This has happened a few times over the years. The Billy Click book that I described was a major one. That was sort of my first one where I found them asking me to write whole new scenes into the story. Again, this latest book, My Last Summer with Cass, a very good example of that. As I said, the whole ending sequence of the book had to be rethought, but that was not, wasn't limited to just that. There were a lot of scenes earlier on that needed to be added, or that I was asked to add into the book. In fact, I would say My Last Summer with Cass required more changes. I was asked to make more changes to the story than to any other book I've done. And again, as a writer, as a professional, you can't just throw a tantrum and say, I refuse to make any changes. You're not going to last very long in the business if you have that kind of an attitude. And you sort of choose your battles. I've always felt like 90% of the things they ask for, I should be willing to say yes, or at least sort of find a compromise on. And then maybe 10% are the things where I want to hold my ground and say, look, this is important to me. This is my vision for the story. And that's always seemed kind of fair to me, if you can choose just a few things that you feel you can't bend very much on. Let's move on now to number 5. You may be asked to cut entire scenes out of the story. Again, My Last Summer with Cass is a good example of that. I had 2 or 3 different scenes, and in this case, as a graphic novel, they had been approved in the, the written outline form of the book, only for them to come under greater scrutiny once I'd actually created them in rough form, for the sort of rough draft of the story. And indeed, I had to cut a couple of scenes entirely out of the book, things that I had spent hours creating. So that was a little heartbreaking to think of all the time that had gone into this stuff that just ended up on the cutting room floor. I have to say, looking back on my career, that is fairly unusual to have entire scenes cut out. But it certainly can happen, and I've heard of people who've had, have stories of having to rewrite their story many times and to finally get it right, 10, 15 times. I've probably been lucky by the standards of the industry in never having been asked to make really huge sweeping changes to my story. So get ready for that. Let's move on now to number 6. All editing involves changes to specific lines and moments in the story. If an editor doesn't ask for such changes, either you are a genius or they're not doing their job. This is just the basics of all editing. They are looking at every beat of the story and trying to make sure that you're doing the best possible version of it. And so that you absolutely should be ready for. And sometimes there are certain lines of dialogue that you are just in love with, and they're like, no, this is not good. And I don't think they'd say it that way, but it will be better if you don't include this line, And it can be, again, they come up with this line about kill your darlings, don't get so attached to something that you've come up with that you're kind of have fallen in love with, if it is in fact damaging the overall effect of the story. And again, I would say you have to sort of choose your battles, and if there's something that you genuinely, you sort of standing back and trying to look at your story in an impartial way, and you say, look, I really believe in this line, and I think it should remain this way, then yeah, try to stand up for yourself and argue your case, I'd say. But generally speaking, throughout the entire story, again and again, there's going to be lines, and I would think in every chapter, in every section of your story, that they're asking you to change. And very often, you totally see the logic. Most of the time, really, you see the logic of what they're asking for. Let's move on to number 7. Copy editors will catch grammatical, factual, and continuity errors. And believe me, you will be very grateful for this. Now, I don't know if everyone knows that you kind of go through two editing processes when you created a book. The first thing is they're very focused on story and making sure that the story is working and is effective, you know, the drama, all that good stuff. And then at the end, once you've sort of settled on a good version of the story, then it is handed off to copy editors. And these people are not focusing on the storytelling so much. They're focusing on grammar, as I said, factual stuff, continuity errors. This is a big thing in comics. I've had times where I drew someone in a short sleeve shirt, and then on the next page they got a long sleeve shirt. And it took someone else with eagle eyes to see, oops, you've made a continuity error here. Another thing that I have found in recent years is that sometimes you have accidentally included words or phrases that are actually offensive. You didn't mean to, but especially if you're doing books that are intended for a elementary school or sort of middle school audience, the copy editors are looking at things in terms of sensitivity, and you may accidentally have included some words that are going to make some readers angry, and so that happens a lot, I find, more and more, and you start to learn as a writer. That's the kind of nice thing about the more experience you have. You start to understand these things, and you can kind of nip it in the bud and make the change even before they ask you to, because you've started to learn, oh yeah, they don't like it when you use this word or whatever. Hang on, I've got one last bit of sort of summation advice on this, but I think I'd like to sort of finish up this drawing before I get to number 8. So give me a second, I'll be right back. All right, well, I think I've got enough of the illustration done now. This is not really the finished illustration because this book is going to be full color, so there's a fair amount of work yet to be done before this goes into the finished book. Let's go ahead then and finish it up with this very last little summation. Number 8, you should never take the critiques of an editor personally. They only want what's best for the story and to give your book the best possible chances of success. So yeah, if you've never worked with an editor before and you hand off your precious baby to them and they come back with all these requested changes, that can be a bummer. You may feel threatened. You may start to get defensive. Try not to. Try to take it for what it is. These editors have a wider view than you do. Chances are they are more well-read than you are. They know what's going on in the marketplace in a way that you don't. Just in almost all creative endeavors, it is helpful to have a second pair of eyes, to have someone to see things beyond what you see. And looking back on my career, I'm very grateful that I've had some marvelous editors that have come up with really great ideas for improving each story that I've worked on. But I suppose that brings me to the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. This is the first time I've really dealt with the topic of editors. If you have any other ideas for videos like this, these sort of informational videos that you'd like to cover, go ahead and leave a comment, or better yet, find me on Twitter. Just my name, twitter.com, Mark Crilly. And I would love to hear your suggestions in that regard. But I think it's time for me to lay down this pencil. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. And I'll be back with another one real soon.